Chapter 22. Logical and Scientific Conclusions. I have now briefly outlined a few of the principal arguments for a future life which are based upon the observable and demonstrable facts of experimental psychology. So far as those facts have been definitely ascertained through modern scientific investigations, the treatment has necessarily been brief, for, although the science of the soul is yet in its infancy, the basic facts have accumulated at an astonishing rate since the world has learned where to look for them. From the great mass of data thus far available, I have selected what seem to be the most important, and, to borrow a phrase from art, I have delineated them thus far in sectional detail. A perspective view will now be attempted in the form of a brief resume of the salient features of the argument. This will be done at the risk of what might be considered unnecessary repetition. But the intelligent reader will agree with me that fundamental facts and principles cannot be too thoroughly impressed upon the mind of the earnest and conscientious searcher after truth. The fundamental axiom upon which our argument is based, and which the reader is again requested constantly to bear in mind, is this: there is no faculty, emotion, or organism of the human mind that has not its use, function, or object. The first great fundamental fact presented to view is that man is endowed with a dual mind. This has been abundantly demonstrated by the facts of experimental hypnotism, cerebral anatomy, and experimental surgery. It has also been shown to be a primordial fact of psychic evolution. The fact of duality alone, considered in connection with our fundamental axiom, is sufficient to put the intelligent observer upon an earnest inquiry into the possible use, function, and object of a dual mental organism. And his first inquiry is, what possible use is there for two minds if both are to perish with the body? A future life, therefore, is at once suggested by this one isolated fact, and the suggestion is further strengthened by the fact that, whilst one of the two minds grows feeble as the body loses its vitality and is extinguished when the brain ceases to perform its functions, the other mind grows strong as the body grows weak, stronger still when the brain ceases to act, and reaches its maximum of power to produce observable phenomena at the very hour of physical dissolution. It is simply impossible, from these two facts alone, to resist the conclusion that the mind which reaches its maximum of observable power at the moment of dissolution is not extinguished by the act of dissolution. These facts, therefore, constitute presumptive evidence of a future life. They are not claimed to be conclusive. Yet it can truly be said that men of sound judgment habitually stake their dearest interests upon evidence less demonstrative of vital propositions. It would, indeed, be difficult to find any other rational hypothesis that would explain all the phenomena pertaining to these two facts. The next great fact, or congeries of facts, which presents itself to view is that one. Each of the two minds possesses powers and functions which are not shared by the other. 2. Each of the two minds is hedged about by limitations not shared by the other. 3. These powers and limitations are divided into three distinct classes, namely, a. those which belong exclusively to the objective mind, b. those which belong exclusively to the subjective mind, c. those which are common to both minds. 4. Those which belong to class A pertain exclusively to physical life and environment. 5. Those which belong to class perform no function whatever in physical life and are observable only under abnormal physical conditions. 6. Those which belong to class smiley face are more or less imperfect finite in their manifestations in the objective mind, whereas each faculty is perfect in the subjective mind. Thus we find man, as he is presented to us in the light of demonstrable facts, possessed of a dual mental organism comprising two classes of faculties, each complete in itself. We find one class of faculties to be finite, perishable, imperfect, and yet well adapted to a physical existence and a material environment, and capable of development, by the processes of evolution, to a high degree of excellence morally, physically, and mentally, within the limits of its finite nature. We also find that the noblest faculties belonging to physical man, those faculties which alone render his existence in this life tolerable or even possible, those faculties which give him dominion over the forces of physical nature, are faculties which pertain exclusively to this life. On the other hand, we find another set of faculties, each perfect in itself, and complete in the aggregate, that is to say, every faculty, attribute, and power necessary to constitute a complete personality being present in perfection. And we find that the most important of those faculties perform no normal function in physical life. Here, then, we have a personality, consent with the physical organism, but possessing independent powers, a distinct entity, with the intellect of a god, a human soul, filled with human emotions, affections, hopes, aspirations, and desires, longing for a mortal life with a passionate yearning that passeth understanding, possessing, in a word, all the intellectual and moral attributes of a perfect manhood, together with a kinetic force often transcending, in its visible manifestations, the power of the physical frame, in a word, a perfect being, nobly planned, a being of godlike powers and of infinite possibilities. In his apostrophe to man, Shakespeare must have embodied a description of an inspired vision, not of a mere human entity as it is visible in the flesh, but of a disembodied soul, clothed with the investiture of heaven, and in full possession of its heritage of immortal attributes. It was a dream of such a being that he put into the mouth of Hamlet in these memorable words, "What a piece of work is a man! How noble in reason! How infinite in faculty! In form and moving how express and admirable! In action how like an angel! In apprehension how like a god!" The reader will not fail to remember the last exclamation in connection with what has been said of man's powers of intuitional perception of divine truth, a power which belongs alone to the soul, a power which in itself is demonstrative of kinship to God, because it is the essential attribute of omniscience. Is it conceivable that there has been created such a manhood without a mission, such faculties without a function, such powers without a purpose? Impossible. If nature is constant, no faculty of the human mind exists without a normal function to perform. If no faculty exists without a normal function to perform, those faculties which do exist must perform their functions either in this life or a future life. If man possesses faculties which perform no normal function in this life, it follows that the functions of such faculties must be performed in a future life. Or, to put the argument in a still more concise and purely syllogistic form, the propositions stand thus: every faculty of the human mind has a normal function to perform either in this life or in a future life. Some faculties of the human mind perform no normal functions in this life. Therefore, some faculties of the human mind are destined to perform their functions in a future life. No scientist will for a moment question the soundness of the major premise of the above syllogism. It is self-evident, axiomatic. No one who is at all familiar with the results of modern scientific research in the field of psychic phenomena will for a moment gainsay the minor premise. The one faculty of telepathy alone is demonstrative of the soundness of that proposition, to say nothing of the faculty of intuitive perception, etc. The major and minor premises being each demonstrably true, the soundness of the conclusion that man is destined to inherit a future life is self-evident. It will be observed that, in constructing this final syllogism, I have done so without reference to the theory of the dual mind. Not that I have the slightest doubt of the scientific accuracy of that hypothesis, for I can have none in view of the array of facts which have been presented. But, as I have already pointed out, the theory of a dual mind and the theory of a unitary mind with dual faculties are concurrent hypotheses and lead to identical conclusions. Hypothesis is not a final dogma. It is merely an instrument of logic. It is the divining rod of truth. Facts are primordial, antecedent, and ultimate, and exist independently of any hypothesis that may be employed to account for them. The fact that the human mind is endowed with two distinct classes of faculties is demonstrable in itself, and exists independently of either the dual or the unitary hypothesis. That being the essential fact, I have framed my syllogism in terms broad enough to arrest the attention and extort the assent of the scientist who is not yet ready fully to endorse the dual hypothesis. I have now finished my argument for a future life. If the facts which have been adduced do not demonstrate my thesis, crudely and imperfectly as they have been presented, then nature herself has performed a miracle and demonstrated her inconstancy. Before closing, however, I desire to draw attention to one general conclusion, derivable from the facts herein presented, which must be a source of pride and gratulation to every inhabitant of Christian lands. Whatever may be his individual belief or bias on the subject of Christianity, that conclusion is that the facts of psychic science fully and completely sustain the religious philosophy of Jesus of Nazareth, demonstrate his perfect mastery of the science of the soul, and confirm every essential doctrine of the Christian religion. It is almost superfluous to remark that this can be said of no other religion on earth. It is true that the religious philosophy of the Hindu is founded upon an observation of the same psychic phenomena. But, as I have remarked in previous chapters, their point of observation did not take in the whole field. That is, they did not take into consideration all of the powers and attributes of the soul. Nor did their partial observation bear the stamp of scientific accuracy, owing to their ignorance of the fundamental law of psychic science. Whereas the Christian religion is based upon an accurate survey of the entire field of psychic science by the most colossal religious genius the world has ever seen. Not only was the whole field surveyed by him, but it was with a full and accurate intuitive knowledge of every principle involved, as well as of every attribute of the human soul. That this is true is scientifically demonstrated by the fact that modern scientific induction reveals, in every detail, the same truths which Jesus proclaimed 1800 years ago. The most specific utterance of Jesus concerning the future life and its conditions is contained in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, which reads as follows: There was a certain rich man, which was clothed in purple and fine linen, and fared sumptuously every day. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate, full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. And it came to pass that the beggar died, and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died, and was buried. And in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water, and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivest thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. And beside all this, between us and you there is a great gulf fixed, so that they which would pass from hence to you cannot, neither can they pass to us, that would come from thence. Then he said, I pray thee therefore, Father, that thou wouldest send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brethren, that he may testify unto them, lest they also come into this place of torment. Abraham saith unto him, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, Nay, Father Abraham, but if one went unto them from the dead, they will repent. And he said unto him, If they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. This parable, couched as it is in general terms, conveys, nevertheless, specific information of the greatest importance. The words, and in hell he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off, convey the information that the souls of men will recognize each other in the future life. The expression, and he cried and said, Father Abraham, etc., shows that spirits communicate with each other in the other world. The words, but Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime, etc., tell us that we remember the particulars of our earthly life, whilst the remaining part of the same clause teaches us, generally, that it is through our memory that we are punished for the deeds done in the body, and, specifically, that if the spirit of charity and brotherly love is not regnant in our breasts in this life, the memory of our neglect to relieve human suffering will be a source of torment to us in the world to come. It is nowhere stated that the rich man was not a good citizen in the ordinary affairs of life. The only charge against him was that out of his abundance of this world's goods he failed to relieve the distress of the beggar at his door. The words, then he said, I pray thee therefore, Father, that thou wouldest send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brethren, etc., conveys, in unmistakable language, the information that, good or bad as we may be in this life, we retain, in the future life, our affection for those we love in this form of existence, and that it is partly through our affectional emotions that we are made happy or wretched in the life to come. The unmistakable import of the closing clauses of the parable is that it is neither expedient nor possible, for any purpose whatever, for spirits of the dead to communicate with the living. This parable was obviously intended to convey to the world the sum total of all the knowledge of the conditions of the future life which Jesus could successfully impart to the finite comprehension of his followers. If communication of spirits of the dead with the living is a possibility, he would have taken that occasion to impart the information. Taking it for granted that Jesus knew the laws of the soul and was aware of its powers, functions, and limitations, it is impossible, without impugning his character for sincerity. To suppose that he could have uttered the words of the closing sentences of that parable if spirit communication with the living is either expedient or possible. The points of information, however, which he did from time to time impart, are of the utmost value and importance, and, moreover, they coincide exactly with the inductions of modern science. Thus, modern psychic science reveals the same omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, immanent God, the same loving, tender, benevolent, merciful Father whom Jesus was the first to proclaim. It reveals the same frail man, possessing all the powers, attributes, and limitations which Jesus declared or exemplified. It reveals the same immortal destiny for man which Jesus brought to light, and prescribes the same conditions precedent to its enjoyment. It reveals the soul of man as the possessor of all the faculties, affections, and emotions which are requisite and necessary for the enjoyment of perfect felicity in the future life. And it also reveals, in those same faculties and affectional emotions, in the perfect memory of every detail of the acts and deeds of earthly life, together with the awakened conscience resulting from the intuitive perception of the eternal principles of right and wrong, a most perfect means for conferring the rewards promised by the Christian religion for a well-spent life, as well as for meting out the punishments for vice and crime, in exact and necessary accordance with the deeds done in the body. Moreover, science ceases its revelations at the very point where Jesus paused, namely, at the portals of the tomb. He gave us an assurance of a future life, and science confirms his words. He assured us of abundant rewards in the future life for righteousness in this, and science reveals in us the capacity for the enjoyment of the promised rewards, beyond that his lips were sealed, beyond that science cannot penetrate. The end.